And the Zambian government said, no, you can't do that. This is our broadcasting station. And the government's policy is that we support UNITA. So if you don't go in that direction, you better close shop. And so the ANC closed shop and remained with the broadcasting facilities in Tanzania. But it is now historical fact. It is a matter of historical record as to what happened in Angola, and the government of Zambia actually changed its stance and then said, no, okay, fine, comrades, you can come back and you open your station. And that was at the time when there was an influx of young people, right? So there was a need for the ANC to train people. And again, I'm saying to you that it is very significant that it was actually OR who took it upon himself to come and convince the doubting Thomases amongst us to say, this that we are saying is much more important. And if you fast forward to the negotiations, you then realize the correctness of the position that OR was talking to me about. Because when the opportunity for a negotiated settlement arose, the ANC did not say, we continue with the armed struggle. The ANC said, now that the option for a negotiated settlement is available, then let's go for it. So you look at it from what he told me and how we reached a settlement in South Africa in 1991 or wherever. Now, to me, that's a visionary. That's a visionary. That's a strategist. That's a tactician. He saw way into the future that I, as a young person, did not see. Let me just go on again and say, there is another misconception about radio freedom. And it is not my intention to convince anybody about that, because I know I worked in radio freedom and I know how we worked in radio freedom. The misconception that I'm talking about is that there is a tendency to equate radio freedom to the apartheid propaganda machinery like Radio RSA. It is normally said that, no, you were no different from Radio RSA or Radio Bantu because you were also a mouthpiece of the ANC. You were also a propaganda arm of the ANC. Now, how does one respond to that? Were we a propaganda arm of the ANC? We didn't introduce ourselves as a propaganda arm. But sometimes we have a tendency to use concepts without understanding the origins of those concepts. Propaganda actually started with the Roman Catholic Church. When the Roman Catholic Church felt that they were threatened by, I think, the Protestants, and they then instituted a department within the Roman Catholic Church, which they called the propagation of information, or propagation of the faith. The term propaganda assumes negative connotations after 1914, the manner in which it was used. But that's not the point at this, but primarily, what we were engaged in, if I have to use the term, we were engaged in the propagation of the policies and the views of the ANC about apartheid in South Africa. We were engaged in the mobilization of the people of South Africa to take up arms or use whatever methods of struggle they can master to fight against apartheid. We were involved in instilling that courage and that belief in the might of the people themselves to liberate themselves. Steve Biko says in one a quote by him, he says, the most potent weapon in the hands of the enemy is the mind of the oppressed. We had to liberate the people of South Africa through radio to say, you are capable of liberating yourselves, and it is not the natural order of things that you should be deprived of your rights as a people. Let me try and fast track. As I said earlier, I had the opportunity to work very closely with OR. Again, at one point, to demonstrate just how OR understood communication and how important it was for him. He meets the president of Madagascar at the time. President Ratsiraka. And President Ratsiraka says, you know, we're a poor country, Madagascar, the island. We're a poor country, but we would also want to play a role in supporting your struggle in South Africa. What is it that you can give? What is it that we can do, however little that we can do to support you in your struggle against apartheid? OR did not hesitate. He said, give us broadcasting facilities. And Ratsiraka said, no, we can do that. And so when OR came to Lusaka, he called me and he said, I was called Don then. I said,
Don?
Yes. And he says to me, Don, I met the president of Madagascar, President Ratsiraka, and he has offered us broadcasting facilities. Can you go to Madagascar and initiate discussions on these broadcasting facilities? Now, the ANC has never been to Madagascar, and I say, Mr. President, Madagascar, do we have an office in Madagascar? No, Don, we don't have an office. You will establish an office there. Okay, Mr. President. Do they speak English? No, they don't speak English. They speak French. But, Mr. President, how am I going to? Don, I know you will. You just go. Now, this is a leader empowering me. I have doubts, I have questions, but he has so much confidence in me that I can do this thing. And that confidence is imparted to me. I go to Madagascar, and well and good. There are initial hiccups, I am unable, but finally we establish a radio station. Let me then conclude by saying, or at least maybe 2 or 3 other anecdotes that will give you an understanding of who OR was and how I understood OR, and then we can get to questions. Whenever we invited OR to come and do an interview with us, OR never came there and sat down and did the interview, never once. He would then come and say, Don, what have you been saying? Say, Mr. President, this is what we have been saying on this question. And he would say, why were you saying that? We would say, Mr. President, we analyzed the situation and these are the conclusions that we drew. Are you sure that the conclusions are correct? We say, no, Mr. President, if there's additional information that we are not aware of, but on the basis of the information that we had at the time, we felt that this is the correct position. And OR would go into the studio and say exactly what we had told him, but of course, in a much more sophisticated way than we could. On one occasion, one member of the NEC felt that as Radio Freedom, we were having too much of a free hand, that we were not being monitored because we were broadcasting on shortwave. And he felt that maybe there are certain things that we're saying on the radio that are wrong. And OR called me and said, Don, there is this matter here. There is a member of the NEC who feels that you guys must be monitored. And because we don't know what you are saying. And I say, Mr. President, we don't have a problem with that. However, I must inform you that in radio we work according to deadlines. If we were to have anybody, whether it's a member of the NEC or whoever who's coming to work with us, that person must work with us. We can't go from the studio to bring our scripts to a member of the NEC who is at a different location from us. He must sit with us. He must sit in the story meetings with us. He must debate with us. And we must take conclusions and decisions together with that member of the NEC so that he understands why the positions that we're taking insofar as this matter is concerned. OR said, is that how you work? I said, yes, Mr. President, we have story meetings every day. And each one of us contributes to those story meetings and we come up with a position. And OR said, okay. That matter never arose again. I don't know what OR told to that member of the NEC. Lastly, we were now about to come back. OR had suffered a stroke. Now you will realize that I'm telling you all of these things such that, they are so fresh in my mind. OR was talking to us in Makeni, and he was referring to this document that Ambassador Kingsley was referring to, the Harare Declaration and the prospects of a negotiated settlement in South Africa. He addresses us, he tells us, we're there in Lusaka, and he then says, in conclusion, comrades, I am no longer as strong as I was. I no longer have the same energy that I've had before. But I want to promise you that whatever little bit of energy that remains in my body will be consumed in struggle together with you. Why would you not follow a person like that? Thank you very much.
When we were invited to this session, the question was, out of the illustrious life of O.R. Tambo, what elements does one need to focus on? It's very difficult, Mr. Baloyi, for me to in a few seconds, speak about the life of OR. I can tell about the time that I've met the man and in context of the media freedom and some of the values that he cherished so much as a person. I had the privilege at a very tender early age to have worked with OR directly, first as his bodyguard and later on as his chief bodyguard, that I came to understand some of his underlying values. And one of those values that really resonates very much with me is around the checks and balances in government. OR was a visionary. He realized very early on that within the structures of the ANC, there's a need to develop some legal framework and to start to interrogate constitutional matters. He set up an entity that they call you Tammy, I know him as City and I will refer him to as City, that he called the Department of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, DLCA. DLCA was to start developing constitutional framework, and if you look at the core of what DLCA dealt with it at that stage, it was issues around the constitutional democracy, and that discussion around constitutional democracy was starting to be embedded within the leadership of the movement and within the membership generally. And at the core of the constitutional activities where the question of the media freedom was right at the top of that. Because what I understood that a very powerful state that has, or state institutions that have no checks and balances of the potential to ride short of the very same people they're trying to protect. You would find, and I think Tammy will speak about that or City later on, when he speaks about why Radio Freedom was established. Radio Freedom was not established to tell lies about activities of the ANC, but it was to reflect correctly on policies of the ANC, the developments within the country, but also share information about how the struggle is progressing. That was mainly the function of Radio Freedom, and to inspire people here at home who had no access to an open media platform. But I think those are the issues that right at the beginning that OR felt very strong they must be embedded within the constitutional framework. If later on you look at a document that I really like to talk to very often, the Harare Declaration, or what the UN calls a consensus resolution on apartheid and its consequences in Southern Africa. That's a framework for negotiation. If you look at that document, it's a framework for negotiation. But if you look at the aspect of a future South Africa that OR was talking about, it was a future government that has checks and balances built into it. And the fourth estate, as you are referred to, was very fundamental in that respect. And the question of the type of South Africa that he envisioned. It was a South Africa that it's non-racial, where people are actually viewed in terms of their own contribution in the development of the country. Race for OR was never an issue. So the question of the constitutional framework that we have in later on, even during the negotiation, it was around about a constitutional democracy. There was no discussion about the form of presidential elections with too much powers that rest on the president. There was an understanding that the powers must rest on the judiciary, and this judiciary must be very independent if you look at what is contained in the Harare Declaration. And that was actually the premises of the negotiation, discussing dismantling apartheid, but putting in place a system that would not replicate what the apartheid system did. I've seen OR interacting with media in different ways, but my most astonishing discussion is after the adoption of the Harare Declaration in 1987 in Addis Ababa, when a journalist from Turkey asked him a question actually, So, Mr. Tambo, you submitted this document. If Nelson Mandela is released, aren't we going to see a conflict between you and Nelson Mandela fighting for power? OR's answer was very succinct. He says, Nelson Mandela is Nelson Mandela, it's our leader. Why would anyone contest the leadership of Nelson Mandela? And that was his statement to the media. I think I'll stop here. I'm just worried that of running a lengthy monologue. There are different aspects, as I said to the team, that we could share in terms of the life of OR. But at one stage, it would be good to get that interactive session. I'll stop for now here, Mr. Baloyi.
After that wonderful narration, and also what Ambassador have said, you ask yourself, what is going to happen to this knowledge, that interaction? I'm not going to answer that. I'll call the CEO of the Tambo Foundation to answer that for us. Linda.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you to my fellow panelists, and welcome to you all, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your time. I think, as you can see from listening to the reflections by both Kingsley and Butami, I guess half of you should envy me.